And now it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce a gentleman who actually doesn't need introduction. But since protocol demands that, I will nevertheless give him an introduction. Dr. Santrupt Misra is currently CEO Birla Carbon. He is Director Chemicals and Director Group Human Resources for Aditya Birla Group, which is a 46 billion US dollar global conglomerate. A business leader and an HR professional of standing with over 3 decades of experience in global business leadership, corporate governance, organizational transformation, non-profit leadership, and professional development. Dr. Mishra has worked at board levels for over 2 decades as non-executive director and as executive director in publicly listed companies, unlisted companies, and not-for-profit organizations, both in India and overseas. He is a director on several companies of the Aditya Birla Group, including Aditya Birla Group Capital, Grasim, Birla Carbon Thailand, all of which are listed entities. Under his leadership, Birla Carbon has emerged as a global leader in the carbon black sector. He has been instrumental in developing a strong employer brand for Aditya Birla Group, which was named the best employer in India by Aon Hewitt, Great Place for Leaders to Work by Fortune, Top Company for Leaders by the RBL Group. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Mishra.
Thank you so much, DP. That was very kind of you.
Anytime, sir. And now, Gary, it's over to you and to take this forward. Have a nice meeting, sir. Thank you.
This is a thought leadership series that we've put together since last year, and it's been designed to give acknowledged industry leaders worldwide an opportunity to share their thoughts and their responses to the COVID pandemic so that everybody can learn from that. So I'm delighted to welcome you today, Dr. Santrupt. Thank you for joining us. So if we're okay to start moving, let's go straight into the first question, please. This is where I need to put my glasses on. The first question, how did you respond to the pandemic, both personally and at Aditya Birla?
Well, first of all, thank you, Gary, and to all your colleagues, DP and others, for having me at Horton International's very interesting dialogue leadership series, as you mentioned. I'm delighted to be here. To your question, how did I personally and Aditya Birla Group as an organization respond to the pandemic? I could think of 3 R's, broadly speaking. I think first is respect, second is reflection, and third is rejuvenation. Now, let me explain what I mean. I think, first of all, whether you like it or not, it's bizarre to say that, but I learned to respect the pandemic, that you had to kind of wear the mask, maintain social distance, stay away, do whatever it takes, because you couldn't take the pandemic lightly, nor you could take it for granted. Therefore, you have to respect it. It had brought misery, brought challenges, brought certain amount of anxiety and threat, so you had to respect it. So you had to do what you had to do. Second, it took me to the second R on reflection, because you start reflecting on many things. You were locked down, you were sometimes in isolation, so you just reflected on life, work, colleagues, reflected on the future of humanity. Many things. Thoughts cross your mind when you kind of get locked down and your normal life is interrupted, disrupted by something unknown and that you don't understand very well. And third, of course, was a phase of rejuvenation where you personally rejuvenated, organization rejuvenated, and I will talk about it a little more. But personally, if you ask me, the first thing that crossed my mind was concern. My parents are 85 and 82. As the pandemic unfolded and one found a number of people dying in different parts of the world, including in India and in Mumbai, one could literally hear sirens of ambulances all around, at least in Mumbai. Now, that caused concern about My parents, my wife used to be in Delhi, my daughter is a doctor in London, and my son was with me. So we were, as a family, were at different places, but there was a natural concern about everyone and their welfare. So that was one of the first kind of emotions that I went through. But then came this whole process of adaptation, that you couldn't easily go out because the lockdown was pretty severe in Mumbai. And I live in a duplex apartment on the 34th floor of a building. It's a penthouse. All I could see is beautiful Arabian Sea, the race course in front, but one couldn't go down. And you had to adapt to that lifestyle of being confined to home. I, being a human resources guy, I derive my energy from people. But imagine being confined to your home. So therefore, adapting to this new lifestyle was the second part of it. Then there was a phase as you adapted, I gathered a lot of information about what this pandemic was all about. There's so much of information, ad nauseum television discussions, debate as to how it manifests, what happens, whether you need oximeter, ventilator. And one of the phenomenal things that I gathered, that I, of course, interestingly, personally, acquired the new skill of being a procurement leader, because the government of India requested the Aditya Birla Group to support the government's initiative in procuring personal protective equipment and stuff like that. And my chairman very kindly assigned the responsibility to me. And I have not done procurement, and I didn't know what does an N95 mask look like and who made it and where was it. So I went across from China to Malaysia to Thailand, where you are, Gary, and several countries in the region, to find protective personal equipment for distribution to the government hospitals, NGOs, and others that the government of India wanted to do. So it was pretty network management. So in the early part of the pandemic, personally, I remained very active, morning, noon, and night, trying to organize a very significant amount, close to almost $8-9 million worth of protective equipment that I was getting. And of course, then there was the challenge of connecting with colleagues and others. I got more time, no parties, no dinners, no going out, no late night aircrafts, and no long distance flying. I managed to do more exercise, lost 10, 11 kilos of weight. And I think that was the beneficial impact of the pandemic on me personally. But at the Aditya Birla Group, I think our primary concern was employee safety. As the sun rises and moves to the west, we have operations from China till Brazil. And as the pandemic moved from China through Europe into North America and South America, the primary concern before the group was employee safety. So we brought together all my CHROs of different lines of businesses. We met every Friday at a certain time, both from my colleagues from North America and colleagues from India, to basically track the level of impact it was having on our employees and our operations and what we need to do. And a lot of planning happened, a lot of support services we extended. We gathered data. We tried to see how customers were being served, wherever factories were closed, both in India and other places. How could we support and make sure that our people are feeling confident? And many people went to work from home. People had to be supported in that process. But what we did was that we did some interesting work. We created a network of colleagues, and we created a kind of a COVID call center in India. Was a kind of shared services for us, where any employee, their family member, could reach out should they get an infection, needed information, needed a hospital bed, needed some support, or anything of that kind. And we globally also tried to do early testing in Hungary or in Brazil and many parts of the world where employees were there. So I think the group was basically engaged in first protecting people, creating confidence in them, communicating and maintaining connectivity. And finally, most importantly, we changed our learning mode to entirely digital. In fact, my chairman, Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, curated a series of short talks called Chairman Series with world-class faculty from all over the world, about 12 of those, to make sure that employees did not lose out on learning and getting to understand contemporary trends, world economy, what's happening. Because one of the early things we realized that this entire pandemic could have a very depressing impact on people unless their minds were engaged. So we found learning, and digital learning was a fantastic approach to keep our people engaged, so that they felt normal, they stayed in touch with colleagues and learned. And we did a lot of interesting knowledge integration program. To give you an example, in the middle of the pandemic, we did a program on how different businesses handle their supply chain, what kind of issues came up, and how did they address. So we call it KIPs, knowledge integration programs. So we did a series of things of that kind, both cultural, informal, engagement, and learning activities to make sure worldwide we kept our employees and colleagues all connected with each other.
Lovely, thank you. Let me come back, if I may, please, to one word that you talked about, reflection. That we've all had time working from home to reflect on very many things, even the importance of work to us. And I'm sure everybody, perhaps who's listening to this, has had colleagues who've stayed at home and then decided they didn't want to come back. Has that affected your group at all in any respect, or have you managed to hold on to all of your key employees? How has people's mental health developed? And we'll pick up on wellness later, but has there been an opportunity for you to track what's happened in the past year?
Well, that's a great question. I must say that it is. I salute the colleagues in Aditya Birla Group for the resilience. And the group, as you know, is a 150-year-old corporation, and we always have been characterized by our resilience. Our people displayed that Aditya Birla Group's spirit of resilience during this pandemic. I don't think we had anybody who was holding a critical role that left the company, stayed at home, didn't turn up. Rather, we actually, on intranet of the group, we captured stories of great valor and courage, ownership by our employees of what they did to serve customers, help each other, solve a problem. And I think those positive stories on the internet by our people of what they did, I think that was a tremendous source of energy. In fact, in large parts of the company, we saw attrition levels go down during this period instead of increasing. Of course, some people went back to their hometown, taking advantage of remote working and started working from there. And to an extent, we encouraged the young single people who are in large metro towns, in the anonymity of metro cities, which could have been a very lonely experience. Wherever there was no lockdown and they could go back, some of them asked us, and we encouraged some of them to go back to be with their family, their parents, or whoever, and operate from there. And in fact, as I speak with you, I know several of them still are working remotely from there because our reopening of offices have been gradual, particularly in urban metro cities. Several of our offices in the US have still not opened, actually. All of them are working from home. But of course, as you know, manufacturing plants, people are working. And one of the wonderful aspects of manufacturing plants for us in Thailand and also in India is that many of our factories have their own housing colony where people stay close by. So therefore, operating those plants have been a fantastic. And a lot of the time, people often didn't understand the rationale behind investing into large, housing complexes for your employees, senior managers and others with beautiful infrastructure like clubhouse, swimming pool, tennis courts. Our housing colonies are very self-sufficient in terms of entertainment, medical, schooling, and all of that. And we could very quickly bounce back when lockdown was over in most of our manufacturing, particularly because people lived close to the factory rather within stone's throw away from the factory. And that was a great positive attribute of ours.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to pick up on that stone's throw aspect, but first of all, I want to go back to you coming to Thailand and supporting us in our manufacturing, the N95 masks. Regrettably, we've had to become used to them over the past few years because in northern winter months, December, January, February, it's the peak time for burning off agricultural products, which leads us to have some shockingly high pollution. So as a country, we've become very attuned to wearing masks. it wasn't too difficult then to switch from N95 masks to COVID masks. So I thank you for supporting that. The one aspect here in Southeast Asia, and I'm interested if this is the same in India and the other countries that you operate in, is that the workplace is a very social environment. People like coming to work. It's a very collegiate way of working together. People enjoy being part of a team. And particularly during lockdown, some of my colleagues found it, and I know at other companies, they found it difficult being isolated. They couldn't wait for the lockdown to finish and come back to work. Is that the same in India and the other countries you operate?
Gary, you know better than me that the nature of relationship between work, people, and their personal life varies from culture to culture. In Asia, the work relationship and personal relationships kind of blur. Often work relationships grow into personal relationships, whereas in the West, perhaps people finish their work and maybe they have very few work-related relationships outside of work. They rather more connect with communities around where they live or other friends or whatever. We had a kind of pandemic fatigue that particularly in metro locations, I think large urban cities like Mumbai and Delhi, people wanted to come back. But I think thanks to technology, I think people stayed connected. We had stand-up comedies, we had musical programs, people created family get-togethers through digital mode. And it was very good to see how empowering technology was because it was no longer dependent on corporate initiative. Anybody who had an MS Team or a Zoom organized and invited 10, 20, 30 people and they connected, people had sundowners, they had their drinking parties, all individual in their respective homes. And we had all pictures of this kind of celebration put up. So I think there were 2, 3 things happened in many metropolitan cities where lockdown was there and public transport was not available. People couldn't come. For example, in Mumbai, we ran buses from specially designed, sanitized buses from different parts of the city to facilitate those who could come. But do remember that, in Asia, the relationships matter. Relationships both at family and at workplace do matter. People derive their energy from their interactions at workplace. So a lot of people miss that. But having said that, they didn't have a choice. There was also a sense of fear. Also remember that during this period, the schools were closed. So a lot of colleagues who had young children, they had to stay at home because they didn't have anybody to take care of them. Those who had elderly parents, taking care of your parents is an integral part of family life in Asia and certainly in India. And many of them could not go out to work or to socialize outside for fear of carrying the infection back to their elderly, because I think, the death rate amongst elderly was kind of significant and there was enough information for people to be careful. Also, we had, the young single men and women, and we also had employees who were senior citizens because there was a government ban in India. People above the age of 65 were not allowed to come to workplace even if they wanted to because of fear of infection and the likely kind of crowding at hospitals. So there were a whole lot of different sets of dynamics that were playing out. In India, particularly in Asia, the parents would be always concerned about the welfare of their children. Many of them discouraged even their grown-up children not to go to office unless it's absolutely essential, And fortunately, in Aditya Birla Group, one of the smartest things we could manage to do is to switch the remote mode of working using technology. And we had invested into infrastructure, we had trained people earlier, and we created very quickly MS Team learning modules for people to learn and be able to connect. Of course, there are always people like me who are always technologically challenged, technologically less able amongst your workforce. It was a bit of a challenge to handle them to stay connected. To answer your question, did people miss their colleagues, the workplace, the excitement, the buzz? Answer to that is yes. Some of them, did they desperately want to come down? Answer to that is also yes. Did they all manage to come back? Answer to that is no, because there were restrictions, constraints, fear in family, people dissuaded, and they were also concerned about passing on infection to others. So, what we have done over a period of time is a gradual reopening of offices, rostering, flexible timing, and all kinds of flexibilities to make sure that people feel secure and safe when they come to work.
Lovely, thank you. If we have time later on, perhaps we'll pick up on one of your points that you made in there. When people are working from home, not everybody has an ideal environment to be working at home. And here in Thailand, there can sometimes be perhaps 2 or 3 generations living together in a relatively small and modest home. And to say it is not conducive to work, particularly if there are children running around who can't go to school, it's been a very difficult time for some people. Digital now, it's a truism, it's a cliche now to say that the COVID pandemic has done more to move people towards digitalization than many CIOs perhaps have done over the past several years. But one sector or one group of people that has been seriously affected, in my view, is the managerial class. Excuse me. Now, it's forced the transformation in the business, and especially the shift to remote work, where people can't be monitored perhaps as they had been in the past. So this is leaving a whole group of managers perhaps out in the cold. How has Aditya Birla responded to this? Have you found that you've been able to restructure some businesses or some units, saving costs, saving management, providing other benefits for the company? How's it worked out in your case?
Well, actually, as we went into the pandemic, we were already coming out of an economic slowdown. And therefore, there was already a lot of restructuring plan for specific business that was in the pipeline. There have been global businesses that we have restructured during the pandemic, taking care of our employee value proposition of care. We have implemented new organization structures in some places. So we did all of that. But I think there were 2 or 3 kinds of fundamental leadership challenges that organization faced in this process of remote working. The good news was that because generally, by and large, our attrition levels are low in Aditya Birla Group, the leaders, team leaders, managers, and team members shared a long-standing relationship. And I think once you know people and you have a long relationship, you know what to expect, what not to expect. And that made remote working much easier. But for example, those employees who had just joined just prior to the pandemic or joined remotely during the pandemic, I think for them it was a far harder experience to be integrated into the organization. Because at the end of the day, the organization is not a logo or a name. It's about people and processes and culture and your experience with it and the way you kind of immerse yourself into it. And that immersion experience was missing for new employees, new leaders. So I think to that an extent, it was a challenge. But the other side of it was that Aditya Birla Group as a brand, as an organization, always believed in a set of values of which trust was a very important element. So often large corporations are managed by systems and processes. That's because there's a defined area called workplace, or a defined boundary called an organization where you run systems and processes. But during the pandemic, because people were dispersed and there was remote working and all of that, that inherent value of trust took over. And therefore, even though we could not meaningfully operate systems and processes that we would otherwise have, the factor of trust plays out. And if I may give you an example, you'd be surprised to know that the human resources team of the Aditya Birla Group, my CHRO colleagues, my group human resources, and 140 odd colleagues, we came together for a 90-day project to recreate HR strategy for the group and every individual business. Mind you, we have about 14 businesses. The group and every individual business and HR strategy for 22 to 24, all digitally we created over 90 days with 140 people engaged. It was an idea where we said, look, let's not allow, because normal operation of HR is not happening, let's not allow this to go a waste. Let's bring our creative potential to the fore and craft the HR strategy for next 3 years and reimagine. And we call it avant-garde HR strategy to do experimentation. And it worked brilliantly. And one reason it worked because of this value of trust, where we could rely on people to keep their part of the bargain and deliver and work on different pieces and elements of the strategy to bring it forward. But having said all of that, it was far harder for those managers, and I would perhaps include myself in that category, those of us really truly derive our energy from people and face-to-face interaction. Many of them who could not adapt quickly needed a little bit of tips and coaching.
Mm-hmm.
We ran a series within the company called Be Smart, Be Productive. And it was nothing but 2 cartoon characters and a small message and few tips on how to engage with your colleagues, how to lead a meeting virtually, how to do a team. Small little things called Be Smart, Be Productive. That was the brand name of it. And we ran it right through the pandemic to help our colleagues to do that, because some of them were not too comfortable on how to engage and how to monitor, how to motivate, how to communicate digitally, because they were more comfortable doing it in person in small groups uh, and in team meetings. But as I realize and as I see with every passing week and month, all my colleagues are getting better at that. We all are developing a personal point of view on how to manage a remote workforce, how to stay connected. Interestingly, we had several forms of challenges, during that period, but the network of support system that we had built right across the organization, they all stepped forward and helped people in all kinds of situations.
Lovely, thank you. Actually, you've answered my next question, which was going to be about governance. Did that have to change? But you've covered that already. Let me pick up on one point, please, that you did mention, the onboarding process. Companies are about people, they're about culture. How do you onboard someone when there's limited opportunities to bring them together with other people so that they can gain that inculcated set of values, that the Aditya Birla way of doing things? How have you had to adapt to that, and how have you done it?
Well, few different ways. First of all, let me confess that it cannot be the same doing it digitally and remotely, as you would normally do onboarding when people are there. However, having said that, we have got a huge library of IPR and content around Aditya Birla Group's celebrations, activities, our community work, and all of that. So we threw open digitally so many resources that people were there and they could watch it and see it and got a feel of what it means. For example, about 3 days ago, I was onboarding somebody. I had 1 hour session with somebody who joined from a global company, and the entire hour I spent talking about different stories and my experience of 25 years with the organization, different events and incidents, and what were my takeaways from those events and incidents in my 25 years of professional life with the organization. And at the end of this session with this colleague who had just joined about a week ago, and this happened about 3 or 4 days back, he said to me, "This was a very unusual onboarding process. Each story of yours told me something about the organization and what to expect and not to expect." But perhaps, therefore, I think one of the issues that is coming up is how do we build different kind of skills and people to manage this onboarding process, how it can be, perhaps maybe in some respects is easier. For example, if we had a meeting in Bangkok and somebody joined in Bombay, it may not have been always easy to fly him down to Bangkok just to attend a 1 hour meeting there to get a sense of what does it mean for the group operating in Bangkok. But today, because the meetings are digital, he could join in and perhaps get a sense of colleagues in Bangkok. So there are downsides, but there are also positives. But one of the things, the reflection that you talked about, Gary, earlier, one of the things about reflection is when you have constraints, challenges, threats, one needs to look at the positive side of it rather than the downside of it. So I think in the process of onboarding, the content that you have in the company with regard to your community work or your celebrations on a milestone occasion or your process of honoring people for their achievement, both individuals and teams. For example, your opening of a factory, all of this content that is available in an audiovisual form, which we had kind of accumulated for years together. I think bringing them alive as a kind of archival process onto the digital platform perhaps also help people to get different facets of many things. For example, if we have in Atlanta a research center, in normal course nobody would have gone to the research center as a part of onboarding. But if you have a digital kind of film available that you could show, they could see the entire research process, the labs, the people working, and the equipment available. For a scientist who's just joined, that can be very exciting to see familiar environment. So it is not just about having the content available. How do you kind of bring those together to make packages and make it relevant for the new person that is coming in? For example, if it's a brand manager, if you could show your films and content of new brands that you launched and how did you launch it and what happened, I think that's greatly exciting for a brand manager. I normally found that onboarding normally has a start date and an end date in normal life. But in the remote digital world, you can have a, how should I say, extended, onboarding. You don't have to necessarily end it on the 7th day or 15th day or 30th day. You can do bite-sized, spread over a long period of time.
Thank you, Dr. Santrupt. Yes, and I'm going to continue on that theme. Now that we're not restricted to having people around the corner coming to work with us, we can source people from anywhere in the world, perhaps. So that could help some companies close the skill gap if that's what they're experiencing at the moment. There's a flip side to that as well, which is that not service companies in particular, and our group is in the same boat on this one, we run the risk of losing our raison d'etre, because if our services can be replicated elsewhere in the world, remotely, digitally, why do they need somebody around the corner? Could you comment on that, please? The first part is closing the skills gap with candidates who can be anywhere in the world. And the second part, the existential threat to some companies now that they can be anywhere in the world.
Well, I'm more tempted to talk about your existential threat, but I will go with your sequence.
Oh,
The
you can go
first
with
one.
us
I think,
first. It's okay.
no, it's all right.
Well, I'm still here.
Yeah. Well, we are actually, at one level, I believe that we are being overtly optimistic about the skill gap being just closed remotely because you allow people to work from anywhere. And theoretically speaking, it's possible that the world is your oyster. You can access people from anywhere in the world, specialist skills, rare skills you can acquire, and maybe you don't have to move them. And because you don't have to move them, they may be more willing to work for you, etc. But I think, the other part of it is that your employer brand still remains relevant, because if in the remote corner of Australia, there is an outstanding specialist, unless he understands and knows about my employer brand and knows about us as Aditya Birla Group as an employer, to expect simply because you have a job and that guy is there that it would all both happen and materialize, I think could be far-fetched. So one part is in terms of diversity, numbers, rare skills, specialist skills. people of a certain category who are scarce, maybe, and when you want to encourage a certain lifestyle and avoid dislocation, theoretically, digitally, it's possible that some talent solutions you can find. But the other part is it is not just about the number of people and quantity of talent, etc. I call it talent intensity. You know, talent intensity is when talent interacts with each other. You know, they build on each other's ideas, uh, get to know about developments that's happening. So when we talk about talent for an organization, it is not just about accessing talent from different parts of the world. It is about getting the best out of that talent. So I don't think that, simply having people in different parts of the world just because you could hire, you are necessarily are always able to get the best out of your talent. I think getting best out of your talent may still require some kind of rhythmic, call it gathering or hurdle of some kind, in the organization so that there is actually interaction, building on ideas and bouncing off ideas and exchanging notes and getting a sense of each other's strength. Because not everybody is an extroverted individual. It is only through interaction, gradually people warm up, share, and then you realize, oh boy, he or she has so much to share. Um, So I think that is the first part of it. So it can solve some parts of the problem, not entirely. But if we want to leverage talent and benefit out of talent intensity, simply having a lot of people accessible is not going to solve the problem. Your second part of existential question is, look, digital technology has been playing this disintermediation role for a long time now, an aggregator role or a disintermediation role for a long time. What it does is it is not creating a threat for your existence. What it does you is to challenge you to think more as to what could be the value add or value added services that you as Gary could bring to a search process that a technology cannot bring it. And I think that is the thought leadership question that confronts not just your industry, but perhaps every industry that has the threat of disintermediation, to say what's the value add that that organization or that individual in that industry brings. So I think going forward, search industry may have to make lot more proactive investment into getting a more direct feel for the quality of talent in an industry or a functional sector, because what technology can easily provide at the click of a button faster than you can is a range of names with a lot of data.
Mm.
But what it cannot perhaps provide is ready-made qualitative insight into who that person is, who that professional is, what is the hunger that drives that individual. All of those qualitative feel well packaged is not something very well technology may be able to provide. Very nuancical elements. And that's where perhaps your role still comes in and you can still be valid, provided you kind of change the way you offer the services.
Thank you, Dr. Santrupt. I'm very pleased to hear that. Actually, it accords with my view as well. Technology can certainly identify people, candidates, but can it deliver the best person for the job? That's where our skill as consultants comes in, matching the corporate culture, all those types of things. So we like to think that we deliver individuals rather than resumes. But you've certainly hit on something there, and I'm sure at our next conference we'll be talking about that in some depth. My next topic is wellness, please, and corporate attitudes towards wellness. You touched on it earlier. Do you think that Aditya Birla is an outlier on this one, where you've taken much more care about your employees or your staff, however you choose to address them? Or is your experience that many companies are perhaps talking about it, but not being so effective in doing something about it? What would you say about corporate attitudes to wellness, please?
So, I think wellness is one area which has been most adversely affected by pandemic. and perhaps has been most benefited by pandemic as well. Uh, Obviously, the adverse impact of the pandemic was that a lot of people got infected, some lost their lives, unfortunately. Um, but the positive aspect has been that there's been a wake up call. But like in everything, there's a normal distribution. There are always corporations that are the leaders that have always proactive, thought ahead, and planned, and have made employee wellness as an integral part of their human resource strategy, their employee value proposition. There are on the other extreme of normal distribution would be corporates who never cared, never thought about it, and the large numbers that are in the middle. But what is happening post pandemic is perhaps those who are in the middle are shifting more to the right. Those who are completely nowhere there, they certainly also are shifting a little bit from their extreme left position. Aditya Birla Group has always been a leader. It would surprise you, Gary, if I tell you that we introduced telemedicine almost 15 years ago in our remote factories in India. Because one of our challenges was in the remote factories where thousands of our people worked, not just workmen, but white collar managers, leading huge manufacturing operations in aluminium, cement, viscose fiber, chemicals. We realized that many of them and their family members were wondering whether they are getting deprived of world class healthcare access, consultation, discussion with medical doctors. And 15 years ago, leveraging the emerging technologies of internet, the good old technologies, to connect our factory located hospitals with large urban hospitals in India so that reports can be sent on email and there could be video conferencing consultation with doctors of leading hospitals. Now, today in pandemic, everybody talks about telemedicine, remote consultation with doctors. And this is something Aditya Birla Group introduced 15 years ago. We were far ahead in our times in terms of doing it. We never knew there would be a pandemic, but we were leveraging state of the art technology, matching it with the realities of our existence and the needs of our employees. And that is how, we called it Add More to Life project at that time to improve the quality of life of our people in remote locations. But that was not all. You'd be surprised to know that we have a band of counselors available to provide counseling services to our employees and their families anonymously, either in person or through telephone or video, depending on their preference, in different parts of the country and in some cases in different parts of the world. That was again part of our mental wellness because we believe that stress is a factor. Modern living creates stress, and we need to create infrastructure where employees feel comfortable to have in privacy conversation about their issues. When the pandemic happened, apart from the normal sanitization, PPEs, and all of that we did, as I mentioned to you, we created a call center in India where every employee, their family member could reach out for information. We tied up with the hospitals in different parts of India to preserve beds so that our employees and their family members could get a preference should they need a hospital admission. A lot of our employees wrote to us saying that is a great sense of security it gives us that you have reserved some hospital space should we need, we could go. Now, all of this required teamwork in different arms of the organization, but people came together and did that. But I think corporate world, not just in India, but in all parts of the world, and I connect with many colleagues, CHROs, with many global corporations on different platforms, I do see that the extent of conversation around employee wellness, both physical and mental, preventive medical care, different kinds of support, including remote medical consultation, um, all of that, the awareness has grown, the willingness to invest has grown, to experiment with new offerings and services has grown. and different corporates are charting out different ways to make it an inclusive world where employees take ownership, organization supports, and overall employee wellness goes up.
Very interesting. Thank you. Prescient of Aditya Birla to start that telemedicine so many years ago. And that leads me very neatly into what will probably be my final question today, please, which is, well, bearing in mind that kind of initiative, are there other initiatives that you think, perhaps not Aditya Birla has taken, but other companies have taken, that will become a trend for the rest of 2021 and perhaps linger into 2022 and become the norm as we move on?
I think, one thing would be that all forms of flexibility will become the norm in flexibility in working, benefits, learning, career, etc. That will all become, kind of one of the norms. I think most HR organizations will have to rethink their talent development strategy, because on site, on the job, expat assignments, for example, given the kind of quarantine provisions you have in Thailand and other countries have it, the requirements of travel, etc., will restrict expat assignments. People going for short-term assignments and being able to come back with so the entire development piece would have to be rethought. HR organization structure from a classical structure could change into segmental structure. For example, HR leader or partner for gig workforce, HR leader or partner for remote workforce, HR leader and partner for on-site workforce. Because if there's going to be a combination of this kind of workforce, I believe that there needs to be a dedicated HR organization to support that. And the last perhaps would be the area of employee engagement, where high-tech engagement and high-touch engagement will have to coexist. And different organizations will experiment with different combinations of high-tech and high-touch engagement to make sure that they keep their people productive, satisfied, people, kind of the employer brand strong. So I think, the lessons of pandemic, the adaptive emergent practices that kind of had green shoots during the pandemic, some of this would get full life of their own as people learn to get more comfortable. And I think many HR teams have learned that you could experiment with a lot more things, that HR doesn't have to be run in one particular way, in a straitjacketed manner for everyone, that you could yourself be a source of flexibility by thinking about the way you're thinking about things. And I think, as I mentioned to you, we created a HR strategy for 3 years. We call it avant-garde HR strategy, which basically means like avant-garde art form, which is experimental. We will do many things in HR as experimental. And if things prove to be effective, then we'll find ways to scale it up. If they don't, we'll kill it and move into another experiment. So the entire HR strategy of long term is nothing but a series of experiments. This is how we are looking into the future. So if I take our example, I think every corporation in the world is thinking about some experiments of that kind, where some of them, their learnings are going to get institutionalized, and some will be in a perennial mode of experimentation.
That's probably a great spot to stop this evening, Dr. Santrupt. Thank you. And I want to hold on to that word experiment. Last year was, for I think most of us, the most stressful year of business we've ever had. Never seen anything like it. But it gave us freedom to experiment. This year, a year into the pandemic, we still have that freedom to experiment. And it's opened up very many new ways of thinking. We've thrown out so much of the past that we thought was just simply ingrained, that was going to go on forever, and everything's had to change. And that's an exciting time for all of us. So I'm going to say thank you on behalf of Wharton International, Dr. Santrupt. Thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating hour speaking with you, listening to you, and I'm looking forward to going back over this and watching it so that I can pick up on all the bits I've missed. There's been a massive information. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Enjoyed
Thank
the
you.
conversation with you.